right. Good morning, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Building Nexus Resilience, Addressing Migration and Conflicts in Water, Energy, Food Systems. This is one of several webinars that we've been holding the past year, really looking at the questions at the intersection of migration and water, energy, food nexus challenges. This has really been an effort to bring together two communities, one that is working on the water, energy, food nexus research, assessment, tools, models, and also the community that's working on migration models, predicting future projections for migration flows, and really looking at the opportunity for bringing together those communities and exploring questions at the interface of these different questions, and having these models better speak to each other, maybe benefit one another as we address these challenges. I'd like to say that this webinar series has been an effort that came about as a result of one of our key global network of networks, SustainFood, which is a global network that connects US and Africa networks on water, energy, and food, and taking a systems approach to food system transformation. And in addition to NEXUSNET also, which is another network in Europe that focuses on addressing water, energy, food nexus challenges. We are glad to have with us today and to have this hybrid session for the first time, not only online, which is taking place at the same time as the Dresden Nexus conference here in Dresden in Germany. And we're glad to have with us speakers and partners from UN Migration, IOM, IWMI, the International Water Management Institute, FAO, PRIMA, as well as in partnership with UNU-FLORES and IWRA, who have been part of this effort since the beginning. Before we move forward, I'd like to give a shout out to Aissaoui, who's the chair of the Early Career and Young Professionals Task Force at the IWRA, who will be supporting us online and will be getting some messages and guidance from online, and will be monitoring our Q&A throughout the session. And first of all, I'd like to, for those of you who are joining us for the first time, to kind of revisit the motivation of why water, energy, food, and why migration. If we look at projections that face us today, we are expected to need 20 to 30% more water by 2050, 50 to 60% more food, and more than 50% more energy by 2050. And these are grand challenges, these are complex challenges, but are very much also interconnected. More than 70% of our fresh water goes to our agriculture production, 15% of our global freshwater withdrawals go for energy production, and 30% of our world's energy is consumed throughout the food supply chain from farm to market. And that's all at the time where more than 2.2 billion people still lack access to safe drinking water, more than 700 million people still suffer from chronic hunger, and more than 700 million people still lack access to electricity. So these challenges are complex, are interconnected, and they will emerge in different shapes and levels of severity in different regions, depending on resource availability, depending on technological capability, depending on the human capacity, governance across different hotspots. And while a lot of the literature that we see has looked at these challenges with trends of population growth, climate change, urbanization, and also more recently with different shocks, including COVID-19 and extreme events, there's still a gap in exploring these trends vis-a-vis different migration trends, and also forced displacement that's also happening, and asking the question of how much does insecurity across these sectors act as a contributing factor for people's decision to move? And then once people move, how does those flows of people from one place to another impact resource systems in host countries, and how could we better predict those flows and account for those flows as we plan for the sustainability of our resource systems moving forward. And that's all at a time where, according to the latest IOM report, we have more than 280 million international migrants globally by 2020, so equivalent to 3.6% of the world's population is moving. We have more than 117 million people who are displaced, living in displacement. And I'd like you to reflect really on the figure here, which shows a lot of that movement is happening within the same regions, but also across different regions. And this is all to illustrate, first of all, how complex that picture is. No one sector, no one discipline will be able to address all of that complexity. And this is really was one of the key motivators of getting this webinar series started, which focuses on catalyzing that cross-disciplinary, cross-institutional, international dialogue toward understanding what are the knowledge gaps, what are the opportunities for taking such a holistic systems approach to addressing the interconnected resource challenges at the intersection of migration and water, energy, food systems. Two of these key outcomes that we set for this webinar series are to facilitate the development of a common framework, a roadmap, a guideline for integrating migration into Nexus assessment tools, and to contribute to exploring and developing anticipatory tools, strategies, anticipatory action for incorporating migration dynamics into Nexus assessments with the goal of guiding better evidence-based decision-making toward more sustainable and resilient solutions. So far, across these 3 webinars, we've explored an introduction to the key interconnections between migration, water, energy, food systems. We've looked at different case studies where we saw evidence of these interconnections. We had a dedicated webinar specifically looking at different migration models and different Nexus assessment tools, and looked at some of the challenges of in having those tools and models better speak to each other. And last December, we focused our discussions more on the governance considerations, looking at some of the systemic challenges, the root causes of many of these challenges that we see across these sectors. And I'll be highlighting some of the key messages and key gaps that we've arrived at, and hopefully that will be our launching point for our discussion with our panel today. I'd like to thank many of the organizations and speakers that have contributed to this webinar series. We've had more than 330 attendees across the 3 webinars with more than 70 countries represented. So we are excited to see the momentum across this webinar series and the representation across different countries and different regions globally. So I won't spend a lot of time here, but I'll just like to highlight a few of the examples that we've explored as part of our discussion, looking at the Congo Basin and Sahel regions, and looking at how an example of how water stress driven by climate change, in addition to large-scale hydropower, had an impact on food security, livelihoods, and ecosystems, which had contributed to migration and conflict. Another example of floods in Sudan, which also affected more than 1 million people and displaced 380,000. Also devastating crops, affecting food security outcomes. And also examples from Zimbabwe with declining yields due to changing rainfall patterns affecting yields and droughts that ended up exacerbating poverty and food insecurity and making migration a desired alternative, among others. Now, some of the key research or key messages that we had as part of this webinar series so far is addressing water energy ecosystem challenges does require integrated solutions, but it also requires considering the impact it has on migration dynamics, socioeconomic fragmentation, sociocultural dynamics, sociopolitical volatility, all of which require that systems approach, require an interdisciplinary collaboration across different research disciplines. We need novel context-specific tools that helps us identify, quantify those interlinkages and assess the trade-offs to guide better evidence-based decision-making. And while integrating those nexus assessments with migration models could present significant opportunities for better understanding how resource insecurities may contribute to migration. There are also some challenges that have been identified, especially in looking at the data compatibility and model resolution, which also are discussions that we haven't resolved as part of this webinar, but have been emphasized nonetheless. Current migration models also, we noticed a trend with the focus on physical factors like water, crops, and which often overlook social and economic drivers, which are key, especially when we look at people's decision to migrate. And without holistic and targeted support and interventions that address the root causes of vulnerability as well. So ensuring that we're not, again, looking only at the physical factors, but really looking at some of these root causes of vulnerability in rural areas, which need to be addressed. Now, some of the open research questions that we're building our discussion on today. One was, and this is, you can look at all of the open research questions and highlights in the webinar series communication briefs that you can find online on the webpage for the webinar series. But this is a short list of some of these questions. So how can we improve access to granular disaggregated data and promote interdisciplinary methods to support evidence-based cross-sectoral decision-making, especially when we're looking at making these models speak to each other? How can WEF Nexus assessments be effective or be effectively integrated with migration models to reflect complex multi-scalar drivers and outcomes? How can migration models better incorporate social networks, governance systems, and cultural practices beyond environmental and economic factors? Also looking at vulnerability-focused research, how can these models and policies better capture specific experiences of vulnerable groups, especially women, children, ethnic minorities? And last but not least, focusing on governance and policy coherence, what multi-level governance structures and integrated policy frameworks can help us optimize our management of our interconnected resource systems and migration outcomes under growing climate stresses and trends of conflicts out to that as well. So we're going to use that as that point that we arrived at as our starting point, and we have the pleasure of welcoming 4 esteemed speakers with a lot of experience in this space and a lot to share from global experiences that will build on some of these research gaps that have been identified and will allow us to continue and push this discussion forward. Today we have with us Hind Aissaoui from the International Migration Organization, Dr. Mohsen Hafiz from the International Water Management Institute, Georgia Prati from FAO, from the Food and Agricultural Organization of the United Nations, and Dr. Ali Luma from PRIMA Foundation. It's a pleasure to have you all with us. Dr. Ali and Dr. Mohsen are with us in the room, and Hind and Dr. Prati are with us online. So we'll hear from each of our panelists. First, we'll have short presentations. We'll have 10 minutes each. So we'll go in the order we can see our panelists on the screen. And after that, we'll follow that up with some Q&A and moderation. And please, for our participants online and in the room, if you have any questions, we'll have a dedicated Q&A section at the end. So feel free to add your questions in the chat box, and we'll look at those at the end of the session. So without any further ado, I'm happy to introduce Hind Aissaoui from the International Migration Organization, who's going to present on human mobility in the context of climate change in West and Central Africa, from fair narrative to concrete action. Hind, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Daher. Can you hear me well?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, thank you so much, and thanks for the invitation. And I'm honored to speak alongside other eminent panelists, and happy to see familiar faces. And thank you so much for the great introduction. Just to let you know where I speak from, I'm speaking from Dakar, Senegal, where from the IOM International Organization for Migration office, regional office, covering West and Central Africa, so covering 23 countries. And I'm working on migration, environment, and climate change, or we also could say on human mobility in the context of climate change, environmental degradation, and disaster. So what I propose here, suggest, is that I articulate my intervention around 3 points. First of all, I will set the scene. What are we talking about when we talk about human mobility in the context of climate change in West and Central Africa? What does it mean exactly and concretely? And then IOM's approach, our approach in the region, and also maybe some recommendations for thoughts, so that we can also discuss all together on how to intervene together, because I mean, I'm sure it won't be a surprise for you that intervening on this topic has to be, first of all, in the spirit of collaboration and complementarity between the different stakeholders, in the frame of an integrated approach. So I'm a practitioner, and I will talk to you about our experience here when it comes to human mobility in the context of climate change. So to set the scene a little bit, what are we talking about? I'm going to give you a little bit of the figures. So I'm sure you all know about the Internal Displacement Monitoring Center, the IDMC. Every year they publish a report called the GRID. This is the global report on internal displacement. And according to our colleagues from the IDMC, as of the end of 2023, the region accounted for 285,120 internally displaced persons due to disasters such as floods, storms, or landslides, which represented approximately 3% of the total internally displaced persons in West and Central Africa. Just to let you know that in 2022, it was around 1,650,000 internally displaced people, representing 12% of the whole population of internally displaced persons of the region. So it gives you an idea on how fluctuating it can be. And the next report will be published, I think, mid-May. And of course, we are expecting, given what's happened in the historical floods that we've witnessed in the region, in the Sahel, in Chad, we're expecting that those figures will raise this year for 2025. But as you might know, though, these figures do not consider human mobility induced by slow onset events, such as land degradation, desertification, water scarcity, or sea level rise. They neither don't consider forced immobility induced by climate change. So I think that immobility has also underestimated generally. is overlooked, and we should also study further. If there are any students in the room, definitely e-mobility is a topic of interest to better understand what does it mean to be able to move or not in the context of climate change. So the World Bank in its Groundswell report foresees that in the region, 32 million people could be compelled to move within their countries if no action is undertaken by 2050. So this is a prospective number. It's very also important. So those figures of 32 million people is only by slow onset events. We are not talking about floods and other sudden onset events. And for a country like Benin, a small coastal country like Benin, this movement of population could represent 45% of the whole internal the national population. So it's very important to have a look at those figures and reports. Just also to give you some generalities, human mobility induced by climate change, partially or totally, is first and foremost an internal. It's very important. I mean, I guess you noticed that I mentioned the figures that I mentioned were of about internal displacement and internal migration. And so it's very important to understand that the huge majority of human mobility induced by climate change is first and foremost internal. That migration and its drivers are multi-causal. So climate change, migration occurs in the context of climate change, and climate change has to be seen as an aggravating factor when it comes to vulnerabilities, inequalities, or threats when it comes to conflict settings or fragile settings. So it's very important to understand that it occurs in the context of climate change, and that it is multi-causal, it's complex. So there is not a direct link between climate change and migration and the other way around. So, and the other point I wanted to mention in terms of generality was about immobility. I already mentioned that forced immobility is also a concern. And when it comes to the links with this topic and conflicts, what we can say in the region is that when people used to move in a region where people are used to move to adapt themselves, we are in the region that hosts a good part of nomadic population on Earth. So it's very important, and people used to move. I mean, this is an example, pastoralism, but we have a lot of other examples. It's very important to understand that when people are forced to stay because of conflict, for example, it impacts a lot their capacity of adaptation to climate change. So it's very important to understand that moving is an adaptation strategy to climate change, can be an adaptation strategy to climate change. And the idea, the objective is that this migration is made in an orderly, regular manner, so and a safe manner. So it's what is very important is that we recognize migration as one of the strategies to adapt to climate change. And it's also very important to understand that what is important when it comes to human mobility is the freedom of movement to stay or to move, and also to address the vulnerabilities of people on the move. All people on the move are not vulnerable. All migrants are not vulnerable, but the most vulnerable migrants are also the most vulnerable to climate change. So it comes to our approach, IOM's approach in our region. The idea is to promote solutions for people to move, solutions for people to stay, and so solutions for people on the move. And it's articulated around a three pillar approach, policy work. So what does it mean concretely? It's about having a whole of government approach. As you said, Bassel, at the beginning, is very important to make the people from the migration world and the people from the climate change, but also for the water, from the water world and the agriculture and all the sectors that are involved, to discuss together and to have this dialogue. So, for example, what we promote is the integration of human mobility into national adaptation plans, into also nationally determined contributions into the different climate processes. The knowledge, the second pillar is knowledge and evidence. It's very important, of course, to produce evidence-based policies. But on this knowledge and evidence point, I would like to stress that it's very important to collect the perception. Figures are very important, and they are very important for advocacy, etc. But like the perception of the people who are the front line, the communities who are the front line, are extremely important to inform policy making. So knowledge production has to be very close to the ground and to the communities, and to understand what is exactly at stake. Because we have this tendency sometimes to try to educate people on what is climate change while they are at the forefront, and we should be educated on what they are living so that we can inform the policies and the action. And the third pillar is about community work. I'm sure you've heard of the just transition, climate justice, etc. And it's very important to stress that migrants have an important role to play when it comes to just transition, green jobs, nature-based solutions, so that we build solutions that do not oppose the rights of migrants and the rights of host communities, because generally the most vulnerable migrants and the most vulnerable host communities share the same vulnerabilities. So the idea is around concepts like nature-based solutions, agroecology, should it be on coastal resilience or other sectors, it's very important that we do develop solutions that do not oppose the basic rights of most vulnerable, should they be migrants or host communities. I don't know if I have still the time. How much minutes left, or how much minute did I?
Maybe 1 more minute left. Then.
Okay, good. So some recommendations. So, I mean, first of all, it would be keep on paying attention to the human face of climate change. And I think that integrating human mobility and migration within those discussions is extremely important. When we talk about water, food, and energy nexus, there is, for example, a category of migrants that we generally forget, because when we think of food production or agriculture and migration, we talk about the drive. We generally think about the driver that push people from living their rural territories, but we do not talk enough about labor migrants and the need of, because in the region I'm covering, labor migrants in agriculture, in fisheries and mining are extremely important in terms of numbers. And this is a reality that is generally overlooked, and we have the tendency also to have a look at that is like completely legitimate, but we only focus about transoceanic, something irregular migration, while migration is also about labor migration. And definitely in this nexus of water, energy, and food, I think that having a look at labor migrant, who produces the food, and generally migrants, could be also of interest, and highlights what are the actual vulnerabilities of the migrants and the people who are at the forefront. And also, as I said, keep on advocating for migration as an adaptation strategy, as I said, and maybe also to let you know that here in Dakar in 2022, Senegal hosted the 9th World Water Forum, and it was the first World Water Forum that had like in its core discussions migration. So we do encourage, and we contributed to the work of the World Water Forum, and we would like to congratulate governments like the government of Senegal who include migration as systematically as possible, the topic of migration in the discussions over water. So I won't go over. I mean, I will spare you all the recommendations, which are very interesting, and I can like copy paste them for the sake of time in the chat. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Hind, and we'll hopefully get the chance to also hear more from you during the discussions. Maybe highlighting a few key messages, recognizing migration as an adaptation strategy to climate change, recognizing the multi-causal complex nature of migration, looking at low onset events and its impact on people's migration trends, also recognizing that a lot of that climate change human mobility is internal. And will whether it's internal displacement or internal migration, and building on the idea of looking at migration as an adaptation strategy also begs for the need of alignment maybe, or ensuring that there's coherence in terms of our strategies that respond to climate change, but also to migration. So looking at more coherence, alignment between migration strategies, national adaptation plans, national contributions, etc. So thank you again, Hind, for your intervention. And with that, I'd like to invite Dr. Mohsen Hafiz, who's the Strategic Program Director for Water, Food, and Ecosystems at IWMI, International Water Management Institute, who will be presenting to us, sharing a study from Pakistan.
Thank you. Can I have the mouse? How that will work?
Yes.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. So I will be talking about the climate-induced migration. This is the work is part of the Water, Energy, Food Nexus, one of the CGIAR initiative, and the second is about the fragility, conflict, and migration. And we are presenting about what work we have done, especially on anticipatory action. So how that works.
You need to click the right link.
Right click? This one.
Or I could also.
Yeah, I think it should. I think that should be fine. Thank you. Okay, so I will be next please. Pakistan is very vulnerable to the climate, and then in the last 2 decades, and then especially we are facing one time water scarcity, another time is also on the flood. Particularly here, I'm highlighting that on the flood, which was in 2022, and which has an impact on that one, and around 647,000 people were displaced internally about that one. But when we are looking around in South Asia, internally only the people due to disaster has been hit around 1.2 million in 2023 only for Pakistan. And what we are doing it as the government is doing when any people are moving it due to the floods and disaster and everything. The government is saying it rehabilitation and then they stop. We want to anticipate on that one. What are the challenges climate-induced migration, and especially developing the action plan for anticipatory action, what we can do into those contexts. And just on the 2022, there was around $15 billion loss on economic and part of that one. Next, please. Okay, so this is particularly the hub of the particularly part of the Pakistan in the. This is a district of Hind, which is facing a very interesting case study that is susceptible to the flood, drought, and locust attacks, and also the people from all the 4 provinces are migrating from that area. And this is very common in the last 4 decades. This district has become more and more skeptical, and as part of thing, on one side there is a desert, on the other hand side there is a flood, and then there is a drought, and all sort of things that looking around. We were studying about that one, the water, energy, food nexus, and then we had a subsequent looking around that one, why people are moving it on that one, and what we can do into that one. Next, please. Okay, so the people are moving it. This is the blue is basically showing that one. The line is about the Indus River, And then this is the district. And we are saying that the people are moving from the Sindh, one of the provinces, people are moving from the other province, Balochistan, also from Punjab, and then also from the other 4 provinces, people are migrating. And typically what happens when people move in, then the families will stay in the camps and everything, and then the men will move to the major cities for labor and everything, and then we want to anticipate what actually happening with the families, what sort of problem they are facing. Next, please. Okay, so one of the fundamental, the environment in that region is around hardly 200 millimeter rainfall is the maximum over the whole year. 32.5 around 40 degrees Celsius is common temperature around May, June, July, August. So these are the 4 months. Next, please. The precipitation. Here you will see that when I'm talking about 2022 incidents where there was 575 millimeter rainfall happened over less than 24 hours. And then that's also there are other trends whenever abnormal rainfall happened, and that has a huge impact on the people, livelihood and everything, and people have moved on. Next, please. So we also looked also on the common feature is as there is a lot of agriculture subsidies happening and agriculture activities happening, especially the sugarcane and fertilizer, sugarcane, and then there are also rice crop is grown on the along the river, which is on the blue. Here you see the water is there, but on the other hand side, the people are also facing the water shortage, and also the water aspect is also part, and that also impacting the people in the desert area when there is no rainfall and there is the hunger and all sort of the problems are there. Also, the people are dying due to that one. Next, please. So we looked around the different studies based on the government sources and some of the people which are moving it and what are the hotspots identified on the major communities, migrant community where they settled in, and looking it for the over the period of time for the 2022 and 2010 flood we documented and mapped everything. Next, please. Okay, so as a part of that one, we said, okay, we need to do the scoping of the district study. We went there and we identified the climate migrant communities, and then we have carried out survey of around 826 climate migrant out of 30,000 climate migrant, which is from one incident. And then out of that, we looked around 322 women, 504 men, and we did it around the 70 on the key informant, 43 key informant interviews across the district, province and federal level, and around 12 around the focus group discussion to understand the issues and what sort of thing and how we could develop anticipated guidelines, how we could guide to the government for policy making, how they could include on those. Next, please. As a part of that, these are the in Pakistan became an independent country, and from this side, these are the government has established a permanent site along those are the small camp, which are the along the Indus River. But the most the problem is these sites are every year flooded, and then they establish a permanent site and people are moving it, and again next year the same story happened. And we want to have something more on that, and more permanent on what we can do into those aspects. And as I said, number of 30,000 people have been impacted on any given year, and it goes to 2010, it was around 50,000. Look, next slide, please. We did a different survey and then asked the people what are the questions, what are the problems they are facing it for 2010 and 2022 flood. Also got some of the socioeconomic data from the government sources, from the different institutes, and seeing what we can do into those ones. Understanding that one well. Next, please. So as a part of that, when we look around the themes that covering the water and food insecurity issues, as well as we look around water quality and access. We also looking around the wash, pre and post migration changes in the wealth, also on early warning information system and digital ecosystem. And ultimately, we are looking around that one, what are the challenges and barriers? Do climate-induced migration face in the Hind, and what strategy can be employed to enhance the disaster management and climate resilience for this particular region? Next, please. So the results are that basically when we documented, these are the 806 people whom we documented out of the 30,000. These are the potential location where the migrant have moved, and those are in the small, in the tents and all sort of the things scattered around. Next, please. So we looked also around that one, doing the interview where the people are coming in, influx and also going outflow. What are the things looking around that one, and overall that show that one we are able to migrate map it around 98%, and seeing majority is coming from the Punjab, from that one, which is the province where the Hind district is located. But the rest are also coming from the Sindh, from the downstream in this province, Sindh province, also from the Balochistan provinces, because those are the poverty hubs of that one, and there is no major infrastructure and everything. So whenever any disaster is happening, the people are moving to the major city. Next, please. And we also looked at that one, what are the access problem, what they are facing it, and typically, and that these are the 4 cities within that one, administrative cities within their heat. Their current Cholistan is a desert. Overall, we are facing that kind of thing that people are, do they have a water access problem? And majority are saying, yes, they are having a water access problem, and that's impacting on that one, their health and livelihood and everything. Next, please. So we also looked around, we use the water insecurity tools, and then around on that one, going to the scaling and overall. Next, please. So we looked around overarching, we are looking around the water secure and insecure, basically women and men, about their participation and everything. But overall, we're seeing 54% respondent are water secure, but 46% women are the water insecure. A lot of people are moving it, especially the women, they are moving around the an hour to fetch the water from the nearest town or nearest place for their drinking purpose, for other things, because they are located in a place where there is no permanent infrastructure available. Next, please. Also looking around the water quality and health. What actually is happening when the people are fetching the water and they are living at their place, then there are often high prevalence of diarrhea, gastronitis, typhoid, skin irritation, and cholera is part of that one. And women have reported more on the diarrhea, hepatitis A, and malaria, and all sort of things at that one. And people are affecting, and then how that's impacting on their livelihood. And most part is that on the drinking water, which is the polluted water, and that has impacting on their health and everything. Next, please. Looking around, the common thing is around that one. If you diarrhea, malaria, gastronitis, and typhoid, around 80% of the people are saying out of the survey, but they are impacted one way or the other way on those one. Next, please. Food insecurity, we also on that one. Women's, what are the challenges which you're looking at? Again, we applied the food insecurity index, which has been developed by IWRA, and then looking around that one. The mainly that women are more moderate or the severe food insecure. Men are also, but overall it's 91%. And then this way is there. Next is also looking around people, their livelihood. Majority of people are saying it that they were poorest, but when after migration, then the poorest level has gone high level. The people who were rich are that when they're also moving to the other sort of the category. That's impacting on our livelihood, and that means that long-term economic resilience needed climate adaptation strategy for climate displaced population and what we can do. Next, please. Key message of that one, there is a need of the climate change and migration, which need to be recognized, because when we talked with the government officials, they were saying, no, it's an incident, it's isolated event. And we're saying, no, they need to link up that one, you need to develop a holistic thinking in that one. And because any of the policy or plans are not linking the climate and then the migration, they're keeping that one separate entity. How to different? Then also the gender plays a significant role in affecting the water and food insecurity, and how that could be considered the women as a part of that one policy and planning. The communities as a part of that one, how the communities are continuously facing the challenge on yearly basis, what we can do it, and how differently as a part of that one. And finally is about that one, they should not be any disaster happen. Then they should do it. There is more proactive planning, anticipatory action that need to happen so that they could make a climate proofing and for those vulnerable communities and everything. Next slide, please. So we are looking at about that one, not going into the details, but it just also gave the policy recommendation to the government about the short term, what the government need to do it, what the government need to do on the medium term, and here we said they'll integrate migrant and then the household into the national program, which are the poverty and everything to be better social protection and access to the existence, enhance shelter and camp infrastructure, improve early warning system. One of the common problem was that when the government was issuing warning, no one trusts on the government reliance. It's only that when they are going on a digital private one, then that's the time they're accepting it. And it needed basically more about that one, the advocacy in the raising fund, and then how we could work on the basically policy level approach, and then developing a proactive policy, and that should include the links of the water, energy, food nexus, linking with the climate, and how that's impacting on the migration. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Hassan. From Pakistan, we can already see the affirmation of the same message of the need to align with climate policies, with migration policies, and the tight interlinkages there. With that, we'll move to the presentation by Dr. Georgia Prati, who's the Migration and Climate Change Specialist at the FAO, who will be presenting to us on applying a Nexus approach to climate action planning, the climate change, rural livelihoods, and human mobility nexus. Georgia, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Bassel, and thank you especially for having me here. And nice indeed to see familiar faces. The focus on my intervention today, and I'll try not to go into too much repetition because the other panelists already discussed some of the things that I wanted to talk about. But I mean, I will focus on the climate change, rural livelihoods, and human mobility nexus, which is the core of FAO's work in climate mobility. And I will briefly touch upon the characteristics of this nexus, highlighting why it is so important to work at the intersection of these processes, providing some insights into how it can be done, drawing on FAO's experience and perspectives as the UN agency with the mandate to end hunger and achieve food security for all. So there is, I can't see the slide, so I can't see which slide you are. But so there is now. Yeah.
Can you see my screen, Georgia?
Sorry, I can't hear. Can you repeat?
Can you see my screen? I'm on the second slide. Can you see my screen?
No, I can't. I'm on the third slide. Yeah, good. Yeah, so there is increasingly strong evidence about the complex interlinkages between climate change, rural livelihoods, and human mobility, which is also officially, recognized at global level, for example, in the IPCC 6th assessment report. As it was already said, climate change is placing an immense strain on agri-food systems, with rural communities really bearing the brunt of it. And especially because agriculture constitutes a source of subsistence and income for rural people that are among the world's poorest and most vulnerable. In fact, more than 80% of the world's poorest and most food insecure still live in rural areas and heavily depend on natural resources. Rising temperatures, climate shocks, and slow onset events like drought have triggered cycles of loss and damage across agri-food systems that impact not only food security, but entire ways of life, putting the viability of these rural livelihoods at risk and severely affecting the well-being of rural populations. To give you a sense of the scale of the issue, agriculture bears nearly a quarter of the economic toll for climate disasters, with drought alone causing over 65% of agricultural losses. In least developed and low to middle income countries, drought accounts for 34% of crop and livestock production losses. Worldwide, there are 3.8 billion people whose livelihoods depends on agri-food systems and 1.23 billion people who are still employed in the sector. So climate change impacts on livelihoods have adverse implications for food security, and they consequently also shape human mobility trends, patterns, and outcomes. Vice versa, human mobility shapes rural livelihoods and rural people's capacity to adapt to climate change, creating feedback loops that play across the nexus, as it is shown in the next slide. So let's try to unpeel a bit these intersections and feedback mechanisms across the nexus. So while migration has always been part of rural livelihoods as a way for people to cope with harsh climatic conditions and adapt to the seasonality of agriculture, climate change impacts are shaping human mobility patterns, changing their duration, conditions, and also outcomes. And climate change, as was mentioned before, can also constrain mobility by worsening people's vulnerability and actually eroding the necessary resources to move, especially for the poorest and most marginalized groups. Nonetheless, migration represents an important livelihood diversification and risk management strategy. Migration vis-a-vis social, financial, and in-kind remittances and diaspora investments can help build adaptive capacity and long-term resilience in the context of rural agricultural livelihoods. Human mobility, on the other hand, can have different livelihood implications in places of origin, transit, and destination, which can be both positive and negative also at the same time, and are socially differentiated among migrants and their families. For example, can shape their ability or inability to practice traditional livelihoods and access land and other resources, their ability to maintain cultural ties and identities that are related to certain livelihoods or diets, to lose or preserve traditional knowledge in agricultural practices. Host communities in places of destination, where changes in human mobility can increase pressure on limited resources, such as water and land, but also address labor gaps in agriculture. And mobile groups can bring new skills and knowledge about natural resources management, for example, that could be integrated in local management systems. And then stayers and immobile populations, either by choice or due to the inability to migrate. It is well documented that out-migration has profound socioeconomic and livelihood implications on natural resources management, on livelihood sustainability, but could also create empowerment opportunities, for example, for women or those who stay behind, allowing them a more meaningful engagement in agricultural value chains, for example. It can equally have negative impacts, adding to overburden and unequal share of roles and responsibility. And obviously, this cannot be generalized and is differentiated based on gender, age, disability, and other identities. So there is no time now to delve into these complex intersections, but this certainly conveys the importance and urgency of taking a nexus approach to truly recognize and act on the climate mobility rural livelihoods linkages. Now, if we look at policies, especially climate-related policies, and I'll focus here on NAPs and NDCs, the overall tendency is to tackle these issues in isolation, or to take a blanket approach that overlooks the interacting factors. For example, most NAPs and NDCs do recognize agriculture as one of the most climate vulnerable sectors, but only very few of these policies mention farmers, as highlighted by a recent study conducted by FAO. What this means? This means that the adverse livelihood impacts of climate change on the most vulnerable rural populations, and we're talking about smallholder farmers, pastoralists, indigenous peoples, small-scale fishers, etc., may go unnoticed in climate action plans. And this is problematic because it represents the segment of the population that is most affected and that experiences the highest pressure to migrate out of necessity or that lacks the ability to move. And also in most NAPs and NDCs, human mobility is not given adequate consideration. This is illustrated in the next slide, if you can show it, that draws on policy analysis of human mobility in NAPs and NDCs. And these studies show that while the majority of NAPs nowadays mention some form of human mobility, only a small group include actions to address climate-related mobility. And this gap is obviously important because it is reflected in the implementation of such policies that constitute the backbone of countries' climate adaptation strategies. In NDCs and therefore mitigation planning, human mobility is rarely considered or even mentioned. And then mobility, what I wanted to highlight is also that mobility remains a blind spot in climate policies, is almost never mentioned. And where efforts to integrate migration into sectoral policies do exist, they often happen in silos. From the analysis conducted and also from our hands-on experience as in FAO working on these topics, sectoral climate adaptation, agriculture, and migration policies continue to be designed and implemented pretty much in silos. There is very little coordination and communication between decision makers and policy stakeholders, both across sectors and also at different scales of governance, so from national to local level. When NAPs and NDCs mention human mobility, they tend not to consider mobility and rural livelihoods together. And therefore, they fail to see and as a consequence to act on those intersections that we've seen before and that create reinforcing feedback loops. The implications of these gaps and silos include undermining the success of migration as adaptation, failing to leverage its potential and to recognize its potential, increasing the risk that climate policies and plans may unintentionally and negatively affect human mobility, so affect migrants, host communities, and those who stay behind, and increase also the risk of adverse implications of rural livelihoods failing to mitigate migration trade-offs, because there are also trade-offs in migration processes that might affect adaptation and mitigation efforts. In Nexus approach thinking, is important because first, it acknowledges that solutions for any one dimension must explicitly consider the other two. Climate action seeking to address impacts on rural livelihoods should consider human mobility, and actions aimed at climate mobility should consider links with and implications for sustainable rural livelihoods. Second, it facilitates multi-stakeholder collaboration policy dialogue, helping to address existing siloed approaches. Third, it acknowledges the potential for synergistic and trade-off interactions and outcomes across the nexus. By doing so, it can help facilitate positive outcomes and mitigate also adverse livelihood implications for mobility, from mobility and immobility. It can promote socially inclusive climate action that leads to more equitable outcomes for climate mobility, by recognizing trade-offs in well-being, equity, and sustainability. And fourth, a Nexus approach can facilitate sustainable livelihood pathways in the context of climate mobility by recognizing that mobility constitutes a response to declining, unviable, and lost rural livelihoods in the context of climate change, and by fully recognizing that human mobility has important implications for resilience and sustainability of rural livelihoods in places of origin, transit, and destination. And as I'm aware of time, I won't go into the details of the next slides, but just saying that building on the argument that climate policies should recognize and act on the climate mobility rural livelihood nexus, FAO and the UNU University have recently developed and launched and published online a guiding framework and toolkit to support those engaged in the design, development, and implementation of NAPs and NDCs to apply such approach. In the slides that then I think we will share, you will see an overview of the key principles and the approach that we suggest to take that build on what the other panelists already hinted to, so whole of government, whole of society approach, thinking beyond borders, because climate change doesn't have borders, and similarly livelihood mobility such as pastoralism happens across borders. So just to conclude, I'd like to emphasize that integrating mobility into climate policies and programming presents a number of opportunities for improved adaptation in rural livelihood contexts, and that it is essential to address the root causes of climate-related migration from a livelihood and well-being perspective, and to diffuse the benefits of migration to build adaptive capacities for those groups for whom migration is not an option, the majority of which live in rural areas. And it is essential to work across these intersections to really build sustainable, inclusive, and resilient futures for everyone, those who move, those who stay, and those who return in rural areas. I'll stop here. I'm happy to answer any questions and looking forward to the discussion. Thank you.
Bassel, we can't hear you if you're talking.
Now, can you hear me?
Yes, now we can hear you.
So yeah, I will make it a little bit easier for you, because it looks like maybe for migration, it's very difficult how to handle this migration from the point of view of the WEF Nexus. Here, my idea, and this is the idea of our program, is we are targeting the local communities. So do you think maybe for migration, I think when we think about the migration displacement, we overlook these populations, local populations, marginalized communities in the rural areas, in the remote areas. So they have a lot of issues regarding the water, access to water, to energy, also the degradation of the ecosystem. I think we know this since how many years ago. But the main issue is it's beyond the technology, beyond solution, beyond. So we have the social, the governance solutions, and the institutional solutions. So I think we need to, let's say, think outside the box, because these people in the remote areas, I don't think that they understand the nexus, and they have no idea about all these solutions, sophistication, integrated management of the different solution. But if we can maybe try to highlight their needs exactly, I think we can focus on the social, institutional, and governance challenges, because these could improve the livelihood of this population and also contribute to reduce displacement and migration. So the first question, how can the Nexus help to improve the inclusive governance of these populations? And later on, I will provide some very good example from what we funded in the Mediterranean region. So we need, I think, to provide them the voice and to prioritize the voice of these marginalized groups. Or they are completely sometimes overlooked, even by the local authorities. So it's very important to prioritize the voices of the marginalized populations. Also, we need to empower the local community to participate in decision making. Look at let's say to the NAPS NDCs. Sometimes I never have seen how in the NAPS or NDCs, and I think Georgia, you can correct me, I have at least seen all the different NAPS in the Mediterranean. I didn't see any action to empower the local communities in these NDCs and NAPS. So then we have the integrated community perspective into national governance, because sometimes we have the governance at the national level, when it comes at the local level, there is an issue, and I think we need to work on this. The cooperation among local, national, and regional actors. Sometimes, we are providing more power to the people who have the power, and then there is an issue with the link between the local, the national, and the regional actors. And also regarding the communication, I think we need to establish channels to train this population, because they have a lot of knowledge. They have a lot of local knowledge. I think we can learn from them. Next, please. So how we can maybe the next is, because here the idea is to move forward to the social cohesion. I think this is very, very important, because these people, they think about how to can maybe work together. And the first point that I would like to highlight is here, how to can leverage the social innovations, because the food production is produced by small farmers, small communities. They're scattered, they are not organized. So the fact to think how we can maybe try to leverage the social innovation, they work together, to group together on a model that this will help them to access to the energy, to the water, and they will have also voices at the regional level. I think the social innovation is very important. The second point is the local knowledge. As I said, they have very interesting local knowledge for water, for energy, for food, but we neglected this local knowledge, because they can adopt it if we can maybe revitalize, or maybe we can maybe improve this local knowledge. So this could help for the food security, for the energy security, or whatever, and maybe they will stay in their regions. The dialogue is here is very important. That it's very important to have to implement and to set up a dialogue between the different communities, because sometimes in one region, it's very difficult for them to discuss and to conduct. And the last one is the training. I think it's very important, education, because sometimes they are not aware about what we are doing, and we need to train them, because I think we can learn from them, but as well, I think the fact to raise their awareness also is very, very important. And next, please. No. The policy equation. So I believe that as you said, I think Georgia, the policies are following the service sector. It's a pity, even in the US, not only in Europe or the Mediterranean. So the sector are now following the silo sector. We feel that it's an issue with how we can maybe try to have this integration of policies. So now how we can maybe, if we can go to the local community, the fragile communities, I think this is very important to think about 4 or 5 important points that I would like to highlight it here. The first one is to reduce the conflicting policies. We have several examples, because for the sake of time, I cannot mention it. There is some conflicting policies at the local level, in the local communities, and I think this is very, very important for them if we can reduce these conflicting policies for the local communities. Then we have to do a sort of priority for the local realities of communities in policy design. So they have priorities. We need to discuss with them, because the fact to discuss with them, we can have their priorities, and then maybe you can build on their priorities, because this will help them to improve their local knowledge, also to stay there and to avoid all these displacement and migrations. The policy alignment at national and local levels, this is another important issue. So I think we need to work on it. And also the fourth point, and I'd like to highlight it here, the early warning system, because sometimes we cannot wait until the problem is there. Because if we have some drought, if we have some issue, so we need to have some, let's say, tools that could help to detect any issue regarding this displacement. And I think we don't have the system already in place. And the last but least, this is the multi-stakeholder platform that include the local communities. I heard a lot about the stakeholder involvement, but very few stakeholder engagement. They consider the local communities, the marginalized groups, because I think this is very, very important to involve them. And I will maybe show you a very good example. I think the coordinator is here, Nikos is here, how they solve the issue of the local communities in the Mediterranean. So I would like to here to share with you some good examples. The first one is the implemented in the EcoFuture project. And here the idea of this project is not just to consider the local community, but it put them at the center of the planning. They evaluate their local knowledge, they assess their capacities, but also to align the policies goals with their priorities. You see here the keywords, the priorities of local communities, their local knowledge, and I think this is very, very important for them. And this ensures that the solution that will be implemented by the project or maybe are rooted and socially inclusive and could be sustainable for the future. The second example, next please, is the improvement of the women in the Mediterranean. And this is the Nexus project that integrates capacity building and training to support the local community, in particular for the specific actors and for the rural women. And here you see these different activities oriented to the local communities, in particular for the rural women. And I think this is an added value for this project, because in agriculture, the workforce in the Mediterranean in particular, and in South, I know very well, it's 40%, 50% are active in the farming system. So the fact to think about, to include, so the rural women in the discussion, maybe we can also think to raise their capacity building and to their awareness. This could help them to improve the food production and all the different security of the Nexus. The next slide. So here, this is the involvement of the small farmers. So this is the project that involves the small farmers to build a tool, because if you are a researcher and you have a very fantastic tool and you would like maybe to be adopted by the end users, by the farmers, it's very important to include and to involve the farmers in the development of your tool. This is the co-development, the co-deployment of any innovation tool. I think the local communities, in particular here, the small farm, are involved, and this project Superman involved with them in the beginning, and now this tool is completely, used by different communities, by different farms. They signed an extension agreement with different extension services, with regional authorities. And I think this is another value because of the involvement of these small farmers in the beginning of the implementation of the tool. And the last slide, here is another project called Mountain Herd. I think they are working very well with the local community, in particular with the women, and they establish a community-based seed for and fertilizer enterprise. This is the first time in rural areas, in the mountain region, and I believe this is very, very important because this will improve their capacity to produce in rural areas, as I said, in mountain areas, and they are completely overlooked by even the authorities. They produce traditional food, they increase their productivity through different agricultural practices, because now they know very well how to implement the different agricultural practices by themselves, and before they have no idea. The governance as well has been implemented by this project, but last but not least, it's very important that these people, these rural women in the mountains, they never heard about this digital innovation, and now they're starting to use the digital innovation to sell their products. And this is, I think, it's very important for people who are completely overlooked by the by politics in this region. So I think these are very shortly three examples. But now I would like to highlight some key messages, if we can maybe try to continue the discussion for how we can improve the the migration or the displacement, how we can maybe try to find solutions. I think first off, we need to think about the local community, the marginalized communities, how we can improve them, how we can implement solutions, because we cannot say solutions, we have to avoid these sophisticated solutions. Maybe we can focus on the frugal innovation solution that could be easily adopted and also build on their local knowledge, because there is a lot of local knowledge, and the fact to have their local knowledge, we can maybe revitalize their local knowledge. Maybe we can also improve their local knowledge to improve them, and then they will adopt them easily, the local knowledge. The second one, I think, for the women, I think this is for the gender issue, and for the Nexus, there is an issue because the women in the rural areas, they have direct access to the resources, whether water, energy, or food. And in agriculture, the food production is produced by the small farms, 70–80%. And women are if you look at the workforce, it's 40%, 50%. So how we can maybe try to improve the capacity of the women, of the rural women in the region, and I think this is very important, because the fact to improve their capability in the remote areas, I think the young people, the youth, they have to follow these trends, and then maybe we can try to improve and and to avoid, if I can say, this displacement or migration. And thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Thanks for all of our panelists. We can see how diverse and rich all of the different dimensions that have been covered across these presentations. We heard about NAPs, NDCs, gender, empowerment of stakeholders, importance of more coherence across policies, social innovation, building on local knowledge, etc. So there's a lot for us to reflect on. I'd like to invite our panelists to join us here on stage for a quick round of questions, and we'll be joined also by both our panelists online for a quick Q&A, and I'd like to also invite our participants online to put their questions in the Q&A so we could address those toward the end of the session. I'd first like to start with maybe going back to Hind and the first presentation, and would like to hear on your reflection based on your experience in the region that you cover, and reflecting on moving from short-term humanitarian responses to more longer-term planning in the region. What are some of the challenges that you face, and how could human mobility, through taking that systems approach and Nexus approach that we've been talking about, help in us in shifting from short-term humanitarian responses to more proactive long-term planning.
Thank you so much, Bassel. Well, I mean, my answer, it's a complex question, and the answer would be, I will try to make it as simple as possible, but like having a community-centered approach, as I said, it's the key of also of the success, and having this integrated approach. So this is in itself the opportunity and the challenge. We know that gaps, and some of my eminent colleagues talked about gaps. The idea is to bridge the gaps, and we know that coordination and in order not to reinvent the wheel, sometimes the solutions are here, and it's also about documenting them and building on them. So the main challenges for me would be like the main opportunity here is that we have, when we talk about migration, we talk about we give to the topic a profound and social dimension, and I think this should be our goal. But again, the gaps can be difficult to be bridged. Yeah, I mean that would be my simple answer.
Thank you, Hind. I'd like to move to Dr. Mohsen, and maybe building on the experience that you shared from Pakistan, and maybe reflecting specifically on the institutional governance barriers that you see that are resulting in this lack of coordination, maybe across different sectors, or the alignment of the plans. You mentioned the need for better planning or alignment between climate and migration planning. Are there any clear, again, institutional governance barriers that you see in the space that we need to highlight and address?
Thank you very much. I think I will just give the example from Pakistan and also relate with Africa, some of the work which IWMI is doing. First of all, thank you for inviting me. It's very important question which you have asked. Typically, when we are talking about water and sector or the food sector, and then there are the relevant government entities who are managing the resources from that side. And then as well as for dealing with the disaster, there are the different entities which are at the federal level, which are at the provincial level, and then they have it at the local scale level. And that's on the disaster management authorities. In the case of Pakistan, we have a National Disaster Management Authority, we have a Provincial Disaster Management Authority, and then the local level is the local government. So then the policy, and then the water is managed by the irrigation department, the food insecurity is managed by the agriculture department. There is hardly any coordination between, one is on a horizontal level, at the local scale level, what irrigation department is doing, whether the flood is coming or not, and then they are informing the agriculture and then the local government. That sort of the things are missing as a part of the. Second is on the vertical collaboration. Whatever the federal government is planning and what are the provincial government planning, and then whether the people on the ground, whatever they are reflecting it, is it correct or not? And that sort of the thing needs it on it, because typically when we presented the result to the, to the emergency services, they said, oh, that's amazing. We never thought about that from water perspective. We never thought about that from food insecurity perspective. And then sometimes they're saying that sort of raising the awareness that it's a multi-sectoral approach. It's a nexus one which we need to consider. Typically, and then there are armed forces and then the defense forces who are implied in those critical situations. And they worry only about that one, fetching the people from that one in the flood area, putting them into outside, and then they stop. And then the NGOs comes, and NGO is dealing with all those kind of problems and everything. Just to give you the aspect on that one, when 2022 flood hit in Pakistan, there was around 1 million women stranded pregnant out of the 12 million into the flood water. And then there was a big question on that one, who is looking after on the broader aspect of the humanity? Yes, you moved them from that one, but next 6 months, they are not able to go back. Is that kind of the thinking of that one, the sectoral planning? Is there institute, and no institute is taking that responsibility because the policies are developed in silo. Policies are not developed in consultation with the people on the ground or the community. That's why we want to see, we need to identify the champion within the disaster management authority or within the government sector who are looking around the broader spectrum, not looking around that what they day-to-day job, but what are the bigger things than that one. And then the second thing is there, now you mentioned about there was digital information available to them. Can that be translated to the layman language, whatever they needed the community on the ground, and how that could be developed a collaboration. Third thing is important, most of the people on the ground, the government institutions don't have the capacity. They don't have a technical knowledge, raising the awareness, how that could be working, all these things. These are the complex challenges. So we need to work on the horizontal. I mean, that one, the capacity building, and then linkages are that one that's not looking in the silo approach, but how the sectoral approaches are working in Nexus contact. And then as well as on the vertical one.
I'd like to follow up with a very quick question.
Yep.
In your experience, I mean, you mentioned the importance of raising awareness and capacity building. Do you think that organically leads to more coordination and across sectors, or do we need to create mechanisms for coordination that have financial support, that have specific decision-making power or convening power that is able to push this coordination forward?
I think that when in papers, these things exist. But then most of the developing countries in Asia or Africa started with the fiscal deficit. And then that's how it never comes as, even though there is a formal mechanism on a paper, it's written, but they never have any financial sources to make those things happen. And if that's the kind of dedicated effort could happen, I would prefer for this later option. What you said, coordinated mechanism, but mostly it's on the paper. On the ground, the things are totally different when the crisis hit, and then we need to work it on both sides of the thing. Yes, if that's a kind of mechanism exists, but how that mechanism could be operationalized on the ground to making an impact on a liability, that's very important.
Thank you. I'd like to pose a similar question to Georgia as well, and see from your experience also with your work at FAO, what are some of the key barriers and challenges? Because you also mentioned the similar challenge that was highlighted with Dr. Mohsen's presentation, and you again mentioned the NDCs and the NDPs. So again, could you share with us from your experience also some of the key barriers and challenges that you've seen?
Yeah, I mean, mostly what has been said already. So lack of cross-sectoral coordination, and I wanted to highlight that, I mean, there are siloed approaches at national level, but what we witness most often as FAO, we work a lot with local governments, and it was mentioned, a lack of vertical coordination, especially as when we look at the Nexus, there are certain functions that are centralized and others that are decentralized. So if you look at migration, it's usually centralized, and there is no expertise at local level, whereas agriculture is most often decentralized. So that's a major issue, which is also linked to, again, it was already said, lack of capacities. I think this is the thing that we hear the most, because even when there is willingness to actually work on the Nexus and to improve coherence and coordination, there is really lack of capacities, especially at the local level. So we do need investments into that, because otherwise, mechanisms are on paper, but they need to be implemented, and they need to be implemented at local level, which is where these issues are mostly felt. And then actually, what I wanted to say is that maybe to respond to something that was put on the chat about how to make NAPs and NDCs or climate policies more in general bottom up. That's a big thing. I mean, that's a major issue that emerged, for example, in our consultations while we were preparing for the development of the guiding framework and toolkit for integrating human mobility in NAPs and NDCs from a rural livelihoods perspective. These NAPs and NDCs are top-down by default. So how do we change that? Because the voices of the communities that are mostly affected by climate change and that are experiences the biggest impacts and that are at risk of displacement and high pressure to migrate, etc. They're not heard, and they're not part of the design and the implementation and even the monitoring of these policies. So that's something that needs to be really addressed. And then maybe another point to add is that I would like to say that to some extent, another barrier is also lack of evidence to inform policies. And although there is an growing body of research on the Nexus, it still kind of remain in the context of regional studies, ad hoc studies, etc. But if we look at the national capacity to collect and analyze data at the nexus of climate change, human mobility, and food security rural livelihoods, that is still lacking. And you, Bassel, I think you mentioned at the beginning, of the session, some of the issues still remaining related to data compatibility, model resolution, etc. But that's really important because sometimes to have the buy-in of the governments, the stakeholders to really act on these issues and to invest, for example, in capacity development for this, they do need evidence, context-specific and at national level. And while we do have that in some countries, we don't have that in others, and even when it is present, it's not systematic, and that's a big barrier.
Thank you, Georgia. I'd like to end with a question also to Ali, based on your presentation, and maybe reflecting on from where you stand at an organization like PRIMA, and looking at what are some of maybe the low-hanging fruits, but impactful opportunities for high-impact funding, maybe, that you see in this space. What comes first to mind?
Yes, maybe just before going to this point, regarding the alignment of policies, it's not a question of capacity building. It will not solve the issue. You can do whatever, workshops, training for policymakers, forget it, they will not change their mind and they will not align their policies. What's very important, and I think I discussed it even one of the Minister of Agriculture, we need to look at the different policies across the national level and demonstrate how the trade-offs could be, the impact of trade-offs, and you have to even have an economic assessment of the distinct trade-offs between policies. If the policymakers, they will see that there is economic impact of these trade-offs, for instance, they are providing incentives, and this is maybe leading to trade-offs. If we assess these trade-offs and mainly for the economic point of view, they will change their mind and maybe they will revise their policies and they will. But sorry to say that capacity building, training, they will not solve, and they will not solve this policy alignment. Another point that to respond to the question, in PRIMA, our goal is to have the evidence of the WEF issues, to implement, because we are moving from the Nexus thinking to the implementation, and the fact to implement. The policy mix should be there. I think this is, we highlighted several times. If they will see that there is evidence, economic, environment, and social, maybe this will lead to maybe to change their policy, to align their policy. It is one of the ways to solve this issue. But I believe that there is no only one solution to solve this policy silos. But I think we need to tackle this with different angles. But capacity building training will not solve this policy alignment at all. it could help at certain level, but they will not solve this. The main issue, if we can discuss with them, the impact and the economic impact of the existing trade-offs between different policies. This is if they will see that, and we need metrics, we need evidence, because they would like to see the policy mix. But if you will discuss with them integrated management of cross-sector policies, etc., I am sure that they will not follow, and we will continue the business as usual. So just to wrap up, evidences and the implementation of the Nexus. That's why we're funding Nexus project in the Mediterranean. This will help to align policies. The second point is how we can maybe try to demonstrate the economic impact of the trade-offs between different policies or regulation, and this will lead to maybe improve this cross-sector, and then maybe they will change their mind policies. Thank you.
Thank you very much for this message. I'm mindful of the time because there's another session starting soon here. I'd like to thank our panelists for the insightful case studies and comments that shared as part of this discussion in person and online. I'll invite everyone to check out the webinar webpage where we are documenting all of these recorded sessions as well as communication briefs that are highlighting some of the key messages that are being discussed, so we can keep building the momentum on this discussion and pushing the conversation forward. Give a round of applause to our speakers. And we have actually for our attendees in person and online, we have a short survey. We'd like to hear from you. If you have any recommendations for future speakers, for ideas for future sessions, please go ahead and take this 1-minute survey. We appreciate your input on that. With that, we close the session, and thank you again for your time.
Thank you.